Welcome to New Possibilities. I speak truth to power without fear. So, as you all know, I have been doing a series of videos about Talib Kweli's interview on VladTV, where he's talking about the ADOS movement. And I noticed that Yvette Carnell and Antonio Moore finally did a response to Talib Kweli, but it really didn't focus on him. Like they talked about other issues like the presidential election and some other stuff. And in that discussion, they mentioned Talib Kweli and they kind of responded to him. And I just wanted to talk about that briefly. Overall, I think their response was weak as hell. Their response was nothing but ad hominem attacks. And these are people that claim to have so much knowledge and so much wisdom and so much information. But instead of responding with information and sound logical arguments, all they did was use ad hominem attacks. And this is what they basically did. They talked about that guy Antonio Moore basically said, well, I don't even know Talib Kweli's music like that, as if that has any relevance to the points that Talib Kweli is making. I mean, that's completely irrelevant. Another thing he brought up was Talib Kweli's background, the fact that he has two parents. He was raised in a two-parent household. Both of his parents are professors. And somehow this guy, Antonio Moore, tried to use that to discredit Kweli, to basically suggest, well, he's not really black, he's not really down. I mean, that's the subtle message that he was trying to get across in his little commentary about Talib Kweli. Also, he was using that to basically say, well, Talib Kweli doesn't have any street credibility, he's threatening people and all this and that, but he comes from the family that's like the Huxtables, from the Cosby Show. So, I mean, listening to this, like I expected more from Antonio Moore and Yvette Carnell, because even though I disagree with their positions, like sometimes they make logical arguments. Sometimes they actually do present information and evidence to back up some of their points. But in this, it was nothing but ad hominem attacks where they were basically saying, well, you're not good enough to even be talking about reparations. You don't know what you're talking about because you're just some entertainer. And that's not a real argument. I mean, that's not how you rebut arguments that people make. You don't rebut an argument by simply attacking somebody and discrediting them. Instead, what you do is you address the core points they raise. And neither Yvette Carnell or this guy, Antonio Moore, addressed a single solid point that this brother raised. They didn't contest a single point that this brother raised. So for that reason, their response was weak as hell. Now, there is one thing that Yvette Carnell brought up that I thought was interesting and that I agree with to some extent. Like, one of the big things that they talked about during this Vlad TV interview was, why won't Yvette Carnell and Antonio Moore come on Vlad TV? Why won't they come on here and discuss reparations? And Yvette Carnell brought up a great point about that. First of all, she talked about how she doesn't want to go on somebody else's platform and basically put herself in a position where this person owns the content and the person is getting money off of content that she is producing by conducting it, by participating in the interview. And I think that that's a valid point. The other thing that she brought up was this. She said, like, the fact that we have somebody like Vlad TV that's able to operate in this space speaks to like something that's wrong with us as a people. Like, why should we be going to some white guy to do interviews with black celebrities? Why isn't there somebody black on YouTube that's taking that space? Like this, doing the exact same thing, interviewing black entertainers. Why do we have to rely on these culture vultures who aren't even from our culture? This guy is a foreigner. He's not that I don't have anything against immigrants, as you know, but this is a white guy from Ukraine uh, who got into hip hop culture, and now he's selling black people their own culture. You know, he's interviewing black artists, black entertainers, and he's making money off of black people. And that's the very definition of a culture vulture. Like, why do we even need these kinds of people? Why do we allow these types of people to infiltrate into our community and prosper at our expense? So, I mean, I think that she made a valid point about that. You know, she made a valid point about not having the need to go on platforms like that. When you have your own, you don't need to run to somebody else's platform to boost you or to promote you when you can promote yourself. I mean, like her and that guy Antonio Moore, they have plenty of subscribers themselves. Their audience is nowhere near as large as VladTV's, but still they have their own audience and they control their own content. So I understand like why they wouldn't, you know, get on his program and why it doesn't make sense for them to do so. So you know, I think that that was the one of the few valid points that you know that they raised. You know, this guy Antonio Moore just kept going on about Talib Kweli having a two-parent household and having professors for parents. And then he went on, like this guy Antonio Moore was talking about how he grew up in a situation where his parents were like 16 when they had him, and he wasn't in a two-parent household. I mean, he was kind of suggesting that he is more authentically black because he grew up in such conditions and such hardships. There's nothing black about growing up in dysfunction. There's nothing black about growing up in some single parent household. So this subtle suggestion that Talib Kweli is not a real black person because he had two professors for his parents is just idiotic. It's irrelevant. It has nothing to do with any of the points that the brother Talib Kweli made. And, you know, another thing they kept bringing up is they kept saying, well, this guy Talib Kweli is not even qualified to talk about reparations. He's not qualified. He doesn't have enough credentials. He hasn't studied enough, even though Kweli said that he had been involved in movements dealing with reparations for years before we even heard of ADOS. You know, I think that basically what Antonio Moore and Yvette Carnell was just attack Talib Kweli personally instead of dealing with the substance of what he was saying. Like you had this Yvette Carnell talking about how she would never meet with a Kweli because of some threats that he made and all this and that. That's what she claims. I don't know if those threats are true, if he actually made those threats or not, but that's what she claims. But I can understand why he would be angered by these people because they have been attacking his family. I'm not talking about Yvette Carnell and Antonio Moore themselves, but their minions have. And Yvette Carnell and Antonio Moore have the power, they have the influence to tell their followers to fall back and chill. But instead, they just let them run free like rabid dogs, foaming at the mouth, ready to devour anybody that criticizes this misguided, anti-immigrant, you know, white supremacist puppet movement. Now, they didn't address a single point this brother Talib Kweli made, like his points about ADOS being a front group for white supremacists. They didn't touch that. They didn't touch anything on the connection between ADOS and John Tanton. They didn't touch anything dealing with progressives for immigration reform, co-signing ADOS and backing up ADOS, and Yvette Carnell being a member or board member of Progressives for Immigration Reform, which is a front organization for white supremacists. They didn't touch any of that stuff. They didn't touch anything dealing with this fact that they identify more with whiteness than they identify with Africa. They identify more with America than they identify with the motherland that they came from. They didn't touch any of that kind of stuff. They didn't touch anything dealing with their animosity and their hostility towards other reparations groups that are actually fighting to make a difference. They didn't want to touch that. They didn't want to deal with any of the substance or anything that this brother was saying. Instead, they just attacked him. And they said, well, he just wants attention. That's not a real response. All that is an example of somebody that, since they don't have real